Okay, good morning. My name is Evan Wiener, and I'm going to go over here because all this wiring is here. So, my background's radio and TV. I was on WNEW radio, remember them? Sure. William B. Williams. I was 21 when I started with them in March of 1978. And probably if I was around 300 years ago or so, I'd be doing the same thing, reporting, just a different medium, just writing things down. Tomorrow is the 4th of July. It is supposed to be a celebration, which it is, except that celebration should not be held on the 4th of July. It should be held on the 2nd of July. But, by the way, where did the Declaration of Independence actually come from? Do you know?
Philadelphia?
Actually, Barbados.
Oh, Barbados.
Barbados. And our journey is going to be with George Washington in Barbados and Thomas Jefferson. And it's a journey that took about 113 years. So actually 114 years to be, no, I'm wrong about that. It took 124 years to get to where we are in 1776. Anyway, that is George Washington, and that is me on the west side of Manhattan. And the world's Washington's biggest phallic symbol is the Washington Monument.
I can't see with your...
How about that?
If the thing was not working.
Okay, is that better?
No,
so,
I'll have to move.
Oh, okay.
I can't.
Anyway, that is Washington's biggest phallic symbol, the Washington Monument, which was damaged during an earthquake in 2014, and they were repairing the building at that point. So what about Barbados, and what about Washington, and how did Barbados figure into the Declaration of Independence? Well, Barbados was intimately involved in the English Civil War, which resulted in the defeat and execution of King Charles I in 1649, and the rise of power of Oliver Cromwell as Lord Protector. The war came to Barbados in 1651 and ends with the Charter of Barbados, and everybody in this room, I bet you, is not familiar with the Charter of Barbados, are you? No, didn't think you were. Well, you're going to learn something very quickly. Many royalists who supported King Charles went to Barbados rather than losing their heads, because, you know, it's poor Charles, it's the way it ended there, like the king. And they bought property in Barbados, and they moved from the London fog into the heat and humidity of Barbados. Anybody been to Barbados here? If you love heat and humidity, that's the place to go. The Barbadians were declared traitors. All trade was halted between the island and England, and the Navy fleet was dispatched to Barbados to subdue the royalist leaders. At this point, the Barbadian governor and council issued what was called the first Declaration of Independence. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Declaration of Independence? It was in Barbados. The first Declaration of Independence from the English was in Barbados. And they were traders, and they got to swim in the ocean over there and cool off because it's hot there all the time. Charter of Barbados was agreed upon on January 11th, ratified at the Mermaid Tavern in Ostend on January 17th. There were 23 articles in the Charter of Barbados addressing religious liberty, which was Article 1, free trade, and something called taxation and the authority of the local assembly. In other words, if you want us to behave, you better give us taxation with representation. Taxation with representation. Now, I'm going to move over here so I can read this to you. From this vantage point, this is a plaque in Bridgetown, Barbados, near the cruise port. I spoke on a lot of cruise ships. Anyway, from this vantage point, you can witness one of the naval theaters of the English Civil War, 1642 to 1651. Sir George Askew commanded a naval blockade of the island of Barbados from his ship, the Rainbow, in Ostend's Bay from October 1651 to January 1652. Askew's naval forces were sent to subdue local royalists led by the governor, Lord Willoughby. The stalemate ended in a treaty between the royalist and the parliamentarian faction. After the final conflict in Ostens, the Charter of Barbados was signed on 11 January 1652 at the Mermaid Tavern in Ostens, guaranteed Barbadian colonists their rights to land, also local control of taxation. Local control of taxation, in liberty of conscience, access to the courts of law, and unlimited free trade. In other words, they got taxation with representation, and they bargained for it, and they got it. That no taxes, customs, imports, loans, or excise shall be laid nor levied on any inhabitants of this island without their consent in the General Assembly is Article 3 of the Charter of Barbados. Treaty was to ensure that Barbadians accepted the authority of the English Parliament and also prevented local taxes from being raised without local consent. This is another poster in Bridgetown talking about the history of Barbados in the United States, eventually the United States. Treaty of Ostens was negotiated and signed at the Mermaid Tavern in Ostens in Barbados, 1652, and its concept of no taxation without representation was the inspiration for the Boston Tea Party in 1773 and subsequently included in the Declaration of Independence. So I'm going to ask you about Thomas Jefferson. Original thinker or plagiarist?
Original thinker.
Original thinker. How many say original thinker? How many think he stole stuff?
Never heard
You
of
don't have to reinvent the wheel.
plagiarism.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the Charter in turn influenced the American Declaration of Independence because George Washington, on his visit to Barbados, would have been acquainted with the Charter. George Mason, there's a university on Route 66, not the 66 you're thinking of, but Interstate 66, a little west of Washington, D.C., George Mason University. George Mason actually influenced Jefferson. George Mason wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Thomas Jefferson borrowed a part of it for his opening paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. Other parts of the Declaration came from the Charter of Barbados. So Jefferson might have been an original thinker, but it wasn't beneath him to borrow some stuff, which we all do. So in my writing, everybody borrows something. Mason's declaration was adopted by the Virginia Constitutional Convention on June 12, 1776, which would be 20 days before the Declaration of Independence was pretty much completed. Well, why was George Washington in Barbados? And did you know about George Washington's 6-7 weeks in Barbados, which shaped his life? They don't teach you that, do they? Anyway, well, George is there because of his half-brother, Lawrence Washington, and this is kind of a soap opera here. Lawrence married into a lot of money, and Fairfax County, Virginia, that's the land that they own. And so he was well-to-do, and he's George's half-brother. And one day he goes to the doctor, he's sick and all, and the doctor says, "Look, Larry, I got bad news for you. You got tuberculosis. However, you could get cured." How do you get cured? Go down to Barbados. Go down to Barbados. That heat and humidity is going to suck that tuberculosis right out of you. So he goes back, talks to his wife Ann, and says, "Listen, honey, we have to go somewhere for me to get well." "Well, where?" "Barbados." "Crazy? I'm not going with you." "Hey, get there by the little ship." "I'm not going there. I'm not going there at all." "But honey, you go yourself. We got these 2 little kids here. They're healthy. You know how many miscarriages I've had? I'm not risking that. Go find somebody else." Well, he's looking around and he's looking around, and you know, he's going to the tropics for the winter, and he says, "Hey, George, what are you doing? You're not really doing much of anything, are you?" how about we go on vacation together to Barbados? 19-year-old George Washington says, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go to Barbados and see what's going on. Well, the brothers apparently sailed on a small trading sloop named the Success. The voyage took about 6 weeks. George called the Atlantic Ocean fickle, and it was a merciless ocean. And when they got to Barbados, they did not see that. Welcome you to Carlisle Bay. And that kind of tells you something a little bit about the island, that there are a lot of coral reefs that you can't get through except in a little place by Bridgetown. So the brothers go. George Washington recorded details about everything: the weather, sailing, the fish they caught or tried to catch. And they tried to get a dolphin fish or a pilot fish or shark to eat, or barracudas, tigerfish. On November 2nd, after about 6 weeks on the water, the brothers dock in Bridgetown. And they are going to see Anne Fairfax's uncle, Gedney Clark, who is one of the richest guys in Barbados, part of the slave trade, part of all the other stuff that's going on down there. And it's cool. George said, hey, we're going to live the life of luxury and all that other stuff. It's going to be great. Well, they go to this house, which is still there. It's a historic site on Barbados. And they're told, Mrs. Clark is kind of under the weather. What's wrong? She has smallpox. George is like, just sailed with him with tuberculosis, and now I'm going to a place with smallpox? Do I really want to go? Well, he does. Gedney Clark was the uncle of Lawrence Washington's wife, Anne. He invited him to the house. George goes with some reluctance because she has smallpox. Guess what happens to George in 2 weeks? He has smallpox. They probably landed in this area here. The Barbadian Navy is here now, but this is really the only area that you can dock in the island of Barbados. Barbados, the English settled the island in 1627. Actually, the Portuguese were there before the English, and they decided it wasn't worth going after the island. But they did leave the name for the island as Barbados. It wasn't really named. In Portuguese, the name Barbados is for bearded men, and that's who they saw there, bearded men. But in around 1645, sugar becomes king, and they want sugar in Europe, and also there is the slave trade. So these are the two biggest businesses in the Caribbean, and Clark is involved with that. And Barbados was one of Britain's most precious colony possessions. It was one of the most populated cities in British North America, and again, this is probably where they landed or docked, and here are some Barbadian naval ships. Well, George is introduced to the good life there. He meets a lot of people there through his brother and through his uncle, and the English are looking at him. Hey, you're 19 years old, 6'3". We don't see many people 6'3" around here. Red hair stands out. We think you have a future in North America with us, the Brits, in our territories. So they say, now let's show George around. And they show him around, and they show him all the military apparatus that they have on the island. And George decides, after looking, he said, hey, this place is one entire fortification. While in Barbados, George Washington explored the economics of sugarcane, the role of Barbados in the Atlantic economy, and he explored the forts and the military structures of the island. They wanted him, and they wanted him badly for the British armed forces. And the stone walls are still around Barbados. That cannon kind of fell. But it was a fortress, and they protected it because there was money to be made there. Washington's provincial world, after all, he was just a guy from Virginia. He never went to England to get a posh education like rich English did in the American colonies, or the British North American colonies, he never went there. So all of a sudden, his world is expanded, and he was able to make contact with influential people in Bridgetown that would later guide his career. And he had dinner every night just about at Clark's Bridgetown home, and here he meets colonial officers and judges and merchants and military officers and planters. He stays for 7 weeks, and then it's time to say goodbye to Barbados. The 6-week voyage home was miserable, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why. He's going back roughly toward the end of December, and I've learned this on cruise ships in the Caribbean. When I spoke on them in the winter, the cold fronts come down, and they get hung up in the Caribbean. And that kind of churns up the water, so you rock a little bit, and also the winds that come in are pretty cold. And the 6-week voyage back home was pretty miserable. By the way, in today's society, if they left from, say, Hampton Roads, which is a port there, naval port. If they left from, say, Hampton Roads to Barbados, it would take 3 days today, but it took 6-7 weeks back in the day. The weather was bad. Lawrence stayed behind. George was alone. Remember, he's 6'3". He's strong as an ox. Yet, his sea chest is robbed during the voyage, and they can't find the culprit. Only a bunch of people on there, and they can't find it. The ship, the Industry, was tossed by the storms. He was seasick, and he was really happy to return on January 27th, 1752, just shy of his 20th birthday. He gets into Yorktown, Virginia. But he says, hey, wait a minute, it's a pretty good life. I want that life. Well, how's he get that life? Join the military. And that's what he's going to do. He is going to join the King's Army, the Crown. That is what he's going to do. After all, George Washington is a British citizen, correct? He's a British citizen. So he returns to Virginia, and he dedicates himself to the advancement of the military completely more than any of his Virginia contemporaries. Poor Lawrence. Poor Lawrence. Barbados didn't do anything. He goes over to Bermuda. Nothing happens there. Goes back home to Mount Vernon, Virginia in July of 1752. Dies. He's only 34 years old. Meanwhile, George is seeking a commission in the regular British military establishment. An ambition that was probably prompted and undoubtedly stimulated by his experience in Barbados. And he is going to get involved in the French and Indian War eventually. In December 1752, Washington, with no previous military experience, was made a commander of the Virginia militia based on what he learned in Barbados and the fact that he had people who vouched for him. He saw action in the French and Indian War, a war which he kind of started, and was eventually put in charge of all of Virginia's militia forces. He's 21 years old in 1753, and he's sent as an ambassador from the British Crown to the French officials and Indians as far north as present-day Erie, Pennsylvania. In 1754, he was to assist in the construction of a fort at present-day Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. George Washington was a bit of a screw-up as well, and he is the guy who inadvertently kind of started the French and Indian War back in 1754. It is May 28th, and Lieutenant Colonel Washington, he's already Lieutenant Colonel. This is really quick, because when was he in Barbados? Well, that was November, December, 2.5 years earlier. Anyway, Lieutenant Colonel Washington's surprise attack upon a small French force at Jumonville Glen and the subsequent surrender to French forces at the Battle of Fort Necessity helped spark the French and Indian War, which was part of the imperial conflict between Great Britain and France, also known as the 7-Year War that started in May of 1756. The French commander, Joseph Coulon de Jumonville, was killed in an ambush. The French responded by attacking fortifications that Washington erected following the ambush, forcing his surrender. He's released on parole. Washington and his troops return to Virginia, and that should be it. That should be the end of George Washington. He's going to quit, and he's going to be a surveyor, and that would be that. But there is this war, and while he becomes a surveyor, he decides, you know what, I want to give this a second chance. And he does. And he again joins the British military, and he's in the middle of the French and Indian War in the 7 Years' War in 1756. In his first year in command of the Virginia Regiment, Washington shaped the unit into one of the best provincial military units in the colonies. He was a rigorous disciplinarian. And you do something wrong, you're going to get a lash. But if you desert, he catches you, you're going to be hanging from a tree. He was a tough, tough guy. But it didn't impress the governor of Virginia, Robert Dinwiddie. Didn't impress him at all. Because George wasn't doing all that well on the battlefield. And Dinwiddie would have fights with George. He would go back to Williamsburg. He'd think about it and said, you know what? This military life, I've given it 2 tries, hasn't worked. I got to do something else. I'll go back to being a surveyor. Nothing wrong with being a surveyor, right? You know, we're map out the land and all that. I'm not going to be wealthy, but you know what? It's okay. I could have a good life with that. Well, somewhere along the line, he finds his gold ticket, Martha Washington, the wealthy widow. And all of a sudden, the high life is there for him. All he has to do is get married, and he does. On January 6, 1759, he marries Martha Dangerous Custis. And he also decides, you know what, I'll become a politician. Remember, he's only about 26 years old at the time. He becomes a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. And for the next 16 years, he lived the life of plantation owner and politician. And he misses all the action. He more than likely would have ended up in Quebec City during the big battle where at least the eastern seaboard of North America, where history would change, in Quebec City. And this is the spot, allegedly, where the French general Montcalm is killed in a very brief battle. History changes in Quebec City. How many of you have been up to Quebec City? You saw the stone wall? It's a gorgeous place in the summer. Probably won't want to go there in the winter unless you want to dress. They do have the winter carnival there. And I would have gone to the winter carnival one year, except I got mononucleosis while I was in college, so that was the end of that. But anyway, there's this stone wall, and this is the upper area of Quebec City, and there's the lower area down there. So history changes in Quebec City, and Montcalm, defeated here, received his mortal wound, 13th September 1759. In 1759, the British Army is coming from the area that George Washington was last seen in, and they're moving across into what is now eastern Canada. In 1759, the British, under the command of General James Wolfe, besieged Quebec City for 3 months. The city was defended by the French general, Marquis de Montcalm. Wolfe would also eventually be killed in Quebec City. This is the Plains of Abraham. That's where the battle took place. That's the Chateau Frontenac, the hotel there. And this area is actually here. There is no stone wall over there, but there are cliffs. And I'm going to show you the cliffs right now. This is looking down from the upper village in Quebec City. And that's St. Foy over there, and you can see there are cliffs there. And the French felt that, you know what, there's really no need for us to extend these stone walls because nobody in their right mind is going to climb those stone walls to attack us. Well, rather the cliffs to attack us. Guess what happened? The English climbed the cliff. They got onto the battlefield. The battlefield was this poor farmer by the name of Abraham. All of a sudden he sees this battle take place on his farm. It's 15 minutes long. Montcalm is killed, and that ends it. The English take control of Quebec City. And this is a little after the English took control of Nova Scotia. Maybe George would have ended up in Nova Scotia. Probably not. But there is a possibility he could have been there. 1605, French colonists established the first permanent European settlement in future Canada and the first north of Florida, which was Spanish territory, at Port Royal, founding what became known as Acadia. How many of you are familiar with the word Acadia? Evangeline. And what? Excuse me. Well, that's in Maine. The park is in Maine, Acadia National Park. This is Louisbourg. It was the largest fort that was ever built in North America at the time. It was a French settlement, 1713. In 1730, the French built the biggest military fortress in North America. The British sacked it in 1758. The 1713 Treaty of Utrecht gave Cape Breton, Prince Edward Island, which was known as Ile Saint-Jean at that point, to the French. And how many of you remember the story of Evangeline? I was in 4th grade, 1964-65. I had a teacher by the name of Miss Alexander. She had blue hair. She wore the white blouse. She was about 109 years old. She had the skirt, the white blouse, blue skirt. She had the tissue over here in case her nose ran. And she looked at me, and I was the youngest kid in class because I was a year ahead. I don't think she knew that though, but I was a year ahead. And she said, "You seem to be a shy type. Get in front and read and memorize the poem Evangeline." And all I remember is the forest primeval at this point. But this is based on a true story about the expulsion of the French from Nova Scotia. Louisbourg was captured by the British in 1758, demolished. Some of it's been reconstructed because they needed a tourist site because all the industry pulled out of Cape Breton. And Longfellow, who wasn't supposed to do it, the Catholic priest started this poem and finished it. He went down to Philadelphia, did the research about the exile, or let's not kid ourselves. It was ethnic cleansing of the French. And that's one of the oldest lighthouses in Nova Scotia. And it's a short summer, so enjoy yourself. Get in the water while you can. Halifax, if you walk through the harbor side in Halifax, there are all kind of little things that are up telling you about the history of England, Canada, and we're sorry we did this, we're sorry we did that. Here's Nova Scotia is up here. Some of the French actually were able to escape to France. Some of them went down to what now is Haiti and then hooked a turn west to get into Louisiana. That's exactly why you have American Cajun culture. So all the old Acadians who ended up in Louisiana and formed their own culture. But by 1863, the French and Indian War is just about done. England defeats the French in what is now Canada and the Mississippi Great Lakes line, and English takes what is now Canada. Meanwhile, George Washington is enjoying the high life, and he's he's a politician, but he's not a politician of any merit, just another guy in the House of Burgesses. But here he is in the 1760s. He never got the commission in the English Army, despite being, put this on your business card, the Commander-in-Chief of all forces in defense of Her Majesty's colony in Virginia. Well, he did become a politician, but he missed all the action. He missed all the action in Nova Scotia. He missed all the action in Quebec City. He's home trying to figure out, he's in his 30s now, what am I going to do the rest of my life? 1760s, 1770s, the war is done, but the tensions between the English colonists and England were rising. Now, how many colonies were there?
13.
16. 16. Nova Scotia, Lower Canada, and Upper Canada, or Ontario or Quebec. And there was also one republic stuck in there too, Vermont. That is what the East Coast, or the eastern part of North America, looked like. The Treaty of Paris is signed in 1763. That ends the war between the French, ends the French and Indian War between Great Britain and France. Great Britain, for the first time in more than 50 years, doesn't have a war to fight. So the British Parliament all of a sudden says, hey, we got to pay off the expenses. Well, how do we do this? Well, there's a lot of revenue in the colonies, the 16 colonies. Why don't we go after their money, like John Hancock's money, or Benjamin Franklin's money, or George Washington's money? We can tax them. We'll just tax them. That's what we'll do. We're going to tax them. So it is over, the 7 Years' War. Britain's got this debt, and somebody's got to pay for the war, and it's going to be the colonists. They're watching closely in the south of the St. Lawrence Seaway. Massachusetts colony was just south of Nova Scotia in those days. Today it's Maine and New Brunswick. They know the English have won in Quebec, and they know that they've chased the French from Nova Scotia. So what comes next? Well, the proclamation of 1763. Here is Quebec, here's Nova Scotia, there's a piece of New Brunswick up there. Here are all the colonies, and they're down to the Florida line or the Spanish line. British, in 1763, the British Parliament issues the Proclamation of 1763, prohibiting settlement in the American colonies west of the Appalachians. George is a surveyor. George wants to go west. So do a lot of the people in Virginia. And they're upset. They're very upset. Patrick Henry is really upset as well. In 1765, Parliament imposes the Stamp Act for taxing American colonies. Patrick Henry introduces the Stamp Act resolves in the Virginia House of Burgesses.
Is he the one that said good be liberty
Yes.
or good be death?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't hear that.
These resolves challenge Great Britain's right to impose tax. Hey, wait a minute. 113 years ago, you told Barbadians you didn't have to, you could pay tax only if you say, we'll pay tax. Why are you doing this to us? Why are you doing this to us? You didn't do it in Barbados. Why are you doing it here? Well, 1766, Parliament repeals the Stamp Act but passes the Declaratory Act, which asserts Great Britain's right to pass any laws governing the American colonies. Well, what happened 114 years earlier in Barbados? The Barbadians, they had control of their island. What is going on here? Why are you doing this to us? 1767, Parliament imposes the Townshend duties, taxing imports of tea and glass and paper and lead, paint in the American colonies. Well, it was more of a tariff, but a tariff is a tax. I mean, no getting around it. So anyway, a duty is a tariff, and it's a tax. Meanwhile, this guy is getting very upset. John Hancock. Anybody put their John Hancock anywhere in the last few days? Do young people actually know what that means? Put your John Hancock here? Probably not. Your signature.
Yeah.
John Hancock came into direct conflict with the British in 1768 when one of his merchant ships, the Liberty, was seized in Boston Harbor by British customs officials who claimed that Hancock illegally unloaded cargo without paying the required taxes or tariffs. And this got people in Boston upset. He was a popular figure in Boston, and the seizure of his ship led to angry protests by local residents. In the ensuing months and years, Hancock became increasingly involved in the movement for American independence. Massachusetts, both what is today the state and to the state of Maine, both of them, they were all Massachusetts with that little carve-out in New Hampshire separating them. Anyway, it was the center of the independence movement, and Boston in particular, the cradle of liberty. Hancock might lay claim to being the first president of the United States. By the way, was George Washington the first president of the United States? Yes or no?
Supposedly, yes.
Actually not. And even he admitted that.
Supposedly.
Okay, Hancock was the initial president of the Continental Congress, so he might lay claim to the president of the United States. Meanwhile, look at George. He's all dressed up for his portrait with the stepkids and Martha. He had money. And because he had money, he didn't want to pay taxes. He thought the taxes were unfair. By the late 1760s, Washington experienced firsthand the effects of rising taxes imposed on the American colonists by the British. He came to believe that it was in the best interest of the colonists to declare independence from England. which by this point is about 118 years after the first Declaration of Independence from England was announced, and where? Barbados, a place that he was familiar with. 1767, he opposed the Stamp Act and the Townshend Act, as well as the 1774 Intolerable Act. He also may have known that England pulled its best troops out of North America. Remember my background? I'm a reporter. I started on radio when I was 15 years old doing a show. I was also in newspapers doing newspaper reports for the Bergen Record and the Nyack Journal News in 1971 when I was 15. So I am a journalist. So here I am, and here's George, and here's a Native American, and George is looking for allies by the early 1770s.
Sorry, I have to leave.
Yeah,
Thank you.
in the early 1770s. And he's telling these guys, he says hello to this guy. Guy says, "What brings you up here?" He says, "What brings me up here? Well, what brings me up here is I want to break away from England. And you guys, you should break away also." He says, "You came all the way up the Potomac and the Monongahela to the Ohio River to see me? Yeah, listen, how would you like to get away?" "Well, what do you mean get away?" "Well, how would you like to get away? How would you like to be part of our new country? We'll give you a good deal. We will give you a good deal if you decide to help us." And the guy said, "Well, I got to think about it." He said, "Oh yeah, take your time, take your time. There's no hurry. You know where to contact me." "Yeah." So he's looking for allies. He is looking and looking and looking because he's plotting a way to get out. 1773, Parliament passes the Tax Act. By the way, that was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where that statue is. The Boston Tea Party takes place in Boston, Massachusetts. Got a question for you. Was that the only Tea Party that took place, or were there others? There were others. There were quite a few, but this is the most famous. And it's led by this guy, Samuel Adams, before he became a beer. He's a beer now. People don't really know who he was, but he's the guy who plans out the Tea Party. And if you go to this restaurant in Boston, right off Atlantic Avenue, and decide to go in, for $10 you could go on these two boats, and you could throw tea off of the boats. Or you could go to Atlantic Street or Atlantic Avenue and have a couple tea bags in your pocket and flip it into the water. Same thing if you want to reenact the Tea Party. Seeking to boost the troubled East India Company, British Parliament adjusted import duties. While consignees in Charlestown, South Carolina, New York, and Philadelphia rejected tea shipments, the merchants in Boston said, "Hey, we need the money. We don't care what the Patriots think. We need the money. We're going to take it." I have not been back here since they were renovating the Old South Meeting House, but that's where Adams decided to hatch his plan for the Boston Tea Party. On the night of December 16, 1773, Samuel Adams led but did not go to the ships during the protest. 60 members of the Sons of Liberty boarded 3 ships in Boston Harbor and threw 342 chests of tea overboard. The result? The passage of the punitive coercive acts of 1774. And they were intended to punish the Massachusetts colony. Remember, that's Maine also. There was a Tea Party in York, Massachusetts, which today is part of Maine. A lot of them took place. But they were going to punish Massachusetts, the colony in general, because of the Tea Party, and there was a lot of resistance that was taking place in Boston to the Brits. This is what they did in 1774. Closed Boston Harbor until the tea lost in the Boston Tea Party was paid for. Ended the Massachusetts Constitution and ended free election of town officials. Moved judiciary authority to Britain and British judges, basically declaring martial law in Massachusetts. If you own property there and you have a house, you were required to put up British troops who were in the area. They had to live with you. Now here's one that you wouldn't think would matter in Massachusetts, but it did. Extended freedom of worship to French Catholics in Quebec under British rule, and that angered the Protestant colonists. And the reason that the Brits did that was they knew that there was a war coming, and they wanted to get the Quebecois on their side. In 1759, They defeated the Quebecois in 1763. They take control and they say to the Quebecois, no more French, no more practicing your religion. But they knew a war was coming and they wanted the Quebecois on their side. What they didn't know at the time was the Quebecois, while they hated the British, they really despised the southern colonists because they were godless hedonists. That's what they thought of people like Ben Franklin and others. Now I got a question for you. Did George Washington like the Tea Party, yes or no? Was he in favor of tea parties, yes or no? What do you think? Yes, no? Well, publicly, June of 1774, George Washington wrote, "The cause of Boston will be considered the cause of America." But if you were in Mount Vernon and had a pint or two with him, or if you were at the House of Burgesses, he would tell you, you know, that was a bad thing they did. I disapprove of their conduct, destroying the tea, and that the Bostonians are all mad. Washington was an elite, and because he was an elite, had the money and property, he thought private property should be off limits. How about Benjamin Franklin, formerly of Boston, now of Philadelphia? Did he like the Tea Party, yes or no? Nope. He insisted the British East India Company be reimbursed for the lost tea and even offered to pay for it himself. Meanwhile, in Great Barrington, which is about 90 miles west of Boston, news traveled very slowly, according to this. This is where the municipal offices of Great Barrington are. Near the spot stood the first courthouse of Berkshire County, erected in 1764. Here, August 11, 1774, occurred the first resistance to British rule in America. But that's not true, because the Boston Tea Party was 9 years earlier, but news traveled slowly. The battles of Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, between British troops and the colonial militiamen on April the 19th, 1775, kicked off the American Revolutionary War. Meanwhile, Washington shows up to the Second Congressional Congress, where Peyton Randolph was re-elected president of the Congress. It could be argued that Peyton Randolph was one of the first, if not the first president of the United States after the war started, and George Washington was named commander-in-chief of the American forces. Hancock might have wanted that job. Now, King George back in London declared that the American colonies were in rebellion. Now, Washington kind of shows up like a soldier of fortune. Shows up in a military uniform, ready to go. I'm prepared for war. Well, he had the prestige. He had military experience, although it wasn't all that great. But he knew about the British military because he was part of the British military. And he had charisma. He hated this painting, apparently. Small Head and Big Body by Gilbert Stuart. Remember, George was in Barbados, 1751. He observed the British military tactics while he was there. He gained a keen insight into strengths and weaknesses that proved invaluable during the Revolution. He also got smallpox. He survived. He was immune to smallpox. That was a big deal as well. So he had the ability to keep his struggling colonial army together. His troops were poorly trained. They lacked food, ammunition, and other supplies. Soldiers didn't get their shoes in the winter, but he was able to keep them going in the right direction for him. And he was a good motivator. An old picture of me at the Liberty Bell. I had hair that was brownish. I was asking the guy, the curator, I said, you ever going to get that bell fixed? Look, it's got a crack in it. Well, Declaration of Independence. It's here. And it's July 2nd, 1776. That is when the Declaration of Independence was pretty much done. 1776 on July 2nd, not July the 4th. The reason why, these guys are finished, they got to get out of town. They got to get out of town real quick. I'm going to ask you a question. The guys, the 56 people who signed the Declaration of Independence, patriots or traitors? Patriots or traitors? What do you think?
Yeah, traitors to the English.
Traitors. They were all English citizens. They were traitors. As president of the Continental Congress, Hancock, John Hancock, is credited as the first signer of the Declaration of Independence. His prominent, stylish signature became famous. According to legend, Hancock boldly inscribed his name so the English king, George III, who was nearsighted, would not need his glasses to read it. Today, the term John Hancock is synonymous with signature. And this did not take place on July 4th. This took place probably on June 28th, 1776, or this painting is basically based on that. They were traitors. They were all traitors. George Washington was a traitor. From King George III viewpoint, America's founders were traitors. When the 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence, they knew full well that they were committing treason against the English, and they knew the penalty, death. They were marked for death. Ben Franklin, who after putting his quill pen down, quipped, "We must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly, we shall hang separately." 5 signers were captured by the British and brutally tortured as traitors. At least a dozen of the 56 had their homes pillaged and burned. Ben Franklin was a bit of a ladies' man. In this painting, he's got 2 women fawning all over him. He once said that a woman never loses her beauty from the neck down, among other things. So, but he's not looking for women going to France. After all, he's 70 years old at this point. He's looking for money, and he's looking for people to help him in the revolution. France would give him that money. They would provide money, troops, armament, military leadership, and naval support that tipped the balance of military power in favor of the United States and paved the way for the Continental Army's ultimate victory. And he did find, or the Americans did find, people on the battlefield, people like Alexander Hamilton. This guy, Baron von Steuben, in today's day and age, he would be a DEI hire. That's what they would complain about him. But he was thrown out of the Prussian army because he was gay. And Franklin and others heard about him and said, "Hey, we don't care. Come in, come in. We need your expertise." The former Prussian army officer came to America in December 1777 to help the American cause. He was known as the drill master of Valley Forge for his role in introducing European concepts of military discipline to American troops, and they did not care about what he liked. They needed him. Another guy who came over, another guy who you would say would be a soldier of fortune, Casimir Pulaski, who's got that skyway named after him in New Jersey, and there's a city in Kentucky called Pulaski. Pulaski was involved in the military and in the revolutionary affairs in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. He was one of the leading military commanders for the Bar Confederation, and he fought against the Commonwealth's foreign domination. The uprising failed, he's driven into exile, and Ben Franklin somehow hears about him and says, "Hey, Casimir, why don't you join us? You can have a good time with us. We'll let you do whatever you want on the battlefield. We need you." So he travels to North America to help in the American Revolutionary War. He distinguished himself throughout the Revolution, most notably when he saved the life of George Washington on September 11th, 1777 at the Battle of Brandywine outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. Pulaski became a general in the Continental Army, and he and his friend Michael Kovatz created the Pulaski Cavalry Legion and reformed the American cavalry as a whole. At the Battle of Savannah, while leading a cavalry charge against the British forces, he was fatally wounded. Well, the war carries on, and by 1781 and the battle in Yorktown, Virginia, it's pretty much over. It's done. The Americans defeat Cornwallis in Yorktown, Virginia, the surrender of Cornwallis. And King George III is losing his mind. He is really upset. He cannot believe that this is happening and starts questioning whether he should be king anymore. Then they took him to see a Mel Brooks movie called History of the World Part 1. It's good to be the king. And he remembered, I'm the king. It's good to be the king. But he does write a letter that he's quitting. America is lost. Must we fall beneath the blow? And he goes on saying, maybe I should quit, but he doesn't quit. In 1781, the Americans, with the assistance of France, beat England in Yorktown, Virginia. King George III was reluctant to come to terms with his army's defeat in the Battle of Yorktown. He drafted an abdication speech, but in the end he said, yeah, you're politicians, you do it. I'm going to do king things, you know, I'm not going to get involved. The 1783 Treaty of Paris recognized the United States, and nobody wanted Florida. I mean, let's go with all those mosquitoes, alligators, and there are no roads down there. And where are you going to go? You can't go for a winter vacation in Florida. So Spain, you take it. Washington says see ya to his troops in 1783 at Francis Tavern, 54 Pearl Street, corner of Broad Street in Lower Manhattan. The location played a prominent role in history before, during, and after the American Revolution, serving as headquarters for George Washington, a venue for peace negotiations with the British and housing federal offices in the early republic. Makes sense, you know, in Barbados they went to a tavern to negotiate a treaty. Why not go to a tavern in New York to negotiate a treaty? After the British evacuated New York on November 25th, 1783, Tavern hosted a week later an elaborate turtle feast dinner on December 4th. I had a woman a few months ago say, how much did it cost? I said, I don't know. I didn't see the bill. I said, I wonder if the waiters got good tips. Anyway, it was in a long room, and George Washington said, I'm going back home. I haven't seen Martha in years. I haven't seen her money either. So he said, goodbye, we're out of here. Tavern becomes the seat of government. Today it's still a bar in the museum. So George goes into retirement, but he comes out of retirement. They say, hey George, we need you. We really, really need you. We need you. He was persuaded to attend the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia during the summer of 1787. He's a delegate from Virginia. And he is unanimously elected president of the convention. He is the last president of the United States under the Articles of Confederation. And he didn't like the Articles of Confederation of the 13 colonies. It was a weak central government, and he said he couldn't get his money that he needed during the Revolution. Maybe he needed that money to get ammunition so he could take Nova Scotia. Maybe Nova Scotia would have been part of the United States, but he couldn't get the money, so he decided ultimately, I'm not going to go after it. So the Articles of Confederation was just nothing more than a rope of sand to support the new nation. And his view for the need of a strong federal government grew out of his frustration because the Continental Congress did not give or get the states to give him money. Now, who was the first president of the United States? Well, Washington thought it might have been him, President Samuel Huntington. Washington was the first president of the United States under the U.S. Constitution. Prior to ratification of the Constitution in 1788, the United States was governed by the Articles of Confederation, and that was the supreme law of the land from 1781 to 1789. John Hanson, maybe him. Oh, by the way, how many of you have hosted Thanksgiving dinners? Did you get help cleaning? Or did you clean by yourself? Did you cook and clean by yourself? You didn't like that, did you? Blame him. He's the guy you need to blame. Him. John Hanson. John Hanson. In November 1781, he became the first president of the United States in Congress assembled under the Articles of Confederation, which is why Washington thought he might have also been the first president. By the way, he left one lasting imprint on the United States. He established Thanksgiving Day as the fourth Thursday in November, and he made your life difficult in November. So blame John Hanson. There were 9 presidents, starting with Samuel Huntington, who served as the president of the Continental Congress from 1779 to 1781, and president of the United States in Congress assembled in 1781. George finally becomes the president under the Constitution on February 4th, 1789. 69 people said, you're it. They voted unanimously for him. And he appointed all of the high-ranking officials in the executive and judicial branches, shaping numerous political practices. Somehow along the line on the battlefield, he found this guy, Alexander Hamilton, and he becomes Washington's right-hand man. He supported Hamilton's economic policies whereby the federal government assumed the debts of state governments. Hamilton established the first bank in the United States, the United States Mint, United States Customs Service, and if you want to see Hamilton for nothing, go to Lower Manhattan, go to the Custom House, and you can see this gorgeous building, which is part of the Smithsonian Institute, and they have exhibits there. Washington turned 65 years old in 1797, and he says, hey, look, I've had it. You know, I'm 65 years old. I could go on Medicare. I could go on Social Security. I guess he couldn't because there wasn't, well, whatever. But he says, I'm not seeking a third term. He has a job anyway. He's the management. He's got to manage the plantation at Mount Vernon, Virginia, which is made up of 5 farms, 8,000 acres, a gristmill, a distillery, a fishery, the Manor House Gardens, and he's got outbuildings, and he's got several hundred slaves. So he's kind of enjoying counting his money, not doing much of anything, and he gets notified from the President John Adams and from Hamilton, hey George, we need you. What do you mean you need me? Why? France is going to invade us. No, they're not. Yeah, France is going to invade us. You got to come up to Philadelphia. We got to put together an army. And we got to save the country from France. Huh? No, I don't want to do that. But George, you have to. You're the father of the country. You going to let your kids suffer? All right, I'll do it. So he comes out of retirement. It is November 1789, and Washington met in Philadelphia with his 2 major generals, Alexander Hamilton and Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. South Carolina, they are going to formulate plans for raising a new army, authorized by Congress, and they're going to choose the officers of those regiments. And he misses Thanksgiving. Martha is going to do Thanksgiving all by herself. And he's in Philadelphia for 6 weeks. And these guys put in a series of reports to the Secretary of War, but nothing happened. Well, he goes home. He dies on December 14th, 1799. But in his last year of life, he becomes a partisan hack. Starts writing newspaper articles. Not happy about this, not happy about that. These are the people I want in Congress. And that's how he ended his life. If he was around in 2025, he'd be on cable TV news now. Or maybe have his own podcast, screaming and yelling about what he wanted. Meanwhile, Alexander Hamilton, his right-hand man, would go on to become the founder of the New York Evening Post, the oldest newspaper in the United States. And what was that all about? Simple. Hamilton hated Jefferson. Hamilton suggested that New York become the financial capital of the United States and Jefferson take that capital wherever he wanted. Well, that's what happened. He hated Jefferson. He decided, I'm going to have a newspaper. And every day in the New York Post, he wrote about how much he hated Thomas Jefferson. The founding fathers weren't exactly best of buddies, and they were all traitors. Hamilton actually, he came from Nevis, St. Kitts, then to Bermuda, then to the United States. So he was not native born like Washington in the United States. Any questions, any comments? Your turn to talk about the 4th of July, or the